That's crazy. That's it.
I didn't know it was heated.
I didn't know either. I have the agenda and speak on you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bill Covey, Chairman of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to this April 2018 State Board of Education monthly meeting. To our audience, our agenda and all materials are posted online at NorthCarolinaPublicSchools.org by clicking on State Board of Education meetings at the top right of the page. Our live stream audio is also available through a link at the bottom of the e-board page for each day's agenda. I note that the first Thursday of the month is our official meeting day, and that Wednesday preceding is the day for our committee meetings. While I'm fairly certain that most of you know, I want to announce that shortly following the March meeting, Vice Chairman Collins announced his resignation from the board no later than April the 14th. So tomorrow will be his last meeting. In light of that resignation, not only will we say a formal goodbye to Mr. Collins when he joins us tomorrow, but we will also elect a new vice chairman at the close of the meeting. And for those of you who might not have noticed on our agenda, we have a very special guest joining us tomorrow. Ms. Margaret Spellings, President of the University of North Carolina System. I note today, ladies and gentlemen, that April 4th is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. We remember him today for his work and words and for the loss to his family. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Board members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or appearance of conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in the discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, our agenda and materials have been posted for your access for a week, and you have had the opportunity to review it. If there are no requests for changes, I ask for a motion to approve the agenda for the April 4th and 5th State Board meeting.
Move to approve.
Okay, motion by Ms. White, second by Mr. Davis. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. This morning we have an issues session. I remind everyone that these sessions are part of our annual training requirements because they bring us information on issues and topics of importance to public education and that may have impact on our policies and guidance to the school system. Today, our topic is chronic teacher absenteeism. And Dr. Oxendine and Mr. Davis have worked with the state board and DPI staff to develop this session. I recognize Dr. Oxendine to introduce us to this presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Kobe. My name is Olivia Oxendine, and I work very closely with the staff along with Mr. Eric Davis to pull together, think through this presentation, to think about data that comes from the department, and to kind of ground this report or this presentation in a study that was produced in the fall of 2017 by the Fordham Institute that looked at what appears to be a growing issue around the country in terms of excessive absences among classroom teachers. Now, let me say this. This presentation certainly isn't intended to imply or to suggest in any way that we have a problem with excessive absences among classroom teachers in North Carolina. And it is not to infer that classroom teachers should not miss school, or that classroom teachers should have healthy children, or classroom teachers should not be sick. It's basically a presentation that will introduce us to a core body of knowledge, not really knowledge, that's the wrong term, but a body of facts and data, and also a definition of what is. We're beginning to shape our own North Carolina definition of what is chronic teacher absenteeism. So the purpose, let me just go through a couple of maybe three purposes. To present the board with the core body of data and definitions relative to chronic absenteeism as we begin to frame it that way in North Carolina. To stimulate thinking among state board members around possible causes of excessive teacher absenteeism. And number three, to listen to take questions and comments from the board and entertain a possible interest among board members, if there is an interest, to do a further study into this issue. Dr. Tom Tomberlin will do the presentation, and I think he has a colleague with him from NC State. But before we get into the presentation, I must do a hearty thank you to Betsy West for coordinating and planning our meetings. We've been meeting since, I suppose, maybe last December, I believe, on a monthly basis. On the Thursday after we adjourn our state board meeting, we go into a meeting to talk about this issue. Also to Alexis Schaus, who has provided the data to the committee to make this presentation possible, and Dr. Petrie Martin and her assistance that she has given to this effort. Smart thinking during our meetings, deliberations around what makes sense as far as a tentative definition of chronic teacher absenteeism. So with that said, I will invite Dr. Tomberlin to the mic.
Good morning, Chairman Kobe, Superintendent Johnson, and members of the board. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to talk to you today about chronic teacher absences. As Dr. Oxendine indicated, this is a joint effort between the School Data Research and Reporting Division and School Business Administration with Alexis Schaus and her staff, as well as some research partners I have, Dr. Timothy Drake from North Carolina State, who will be speaking to you a little later in the presentation, and Dr. Andy Baxter from SREB. So I'm very excited to have people coming together that are interested in looking at this question. And again, it's simply a question, and all the data that we're going to share with you today, they're all descriptive, that nothing causal or any relationships we show are just what is going on out there, and we are committed, if the board is so inclined, to digging deeper into any of the issues that are raised in today's discussion. I think it would be helpful for us really quickly to go over teacher absences policy for the state, and understanding the way teacher absences work, and some of the policies related to taking leave from schools can help us understand what, if any, issues there are related to sick leave. So for teachers, there are, in general, three large types of leave opportunities, and that is annual leave, personal leave, and sick leave. Of course, there are other, a little more esoteric leave categories, but these are the three main buckets that teachers deal with. Our leave policies for educators are dictated largely by General Statute 115C. There are statutory provisions in there of when and how teachers can take these leave. But if 115C is silent, we go back to OSHR standard policy for leave taking. So the State Office of Human Resources kind of governs anything that's not specifically spelled out in 115C regarding teachers. So annual leave is of course the probably the most common type of leave that teachers accrue, and that accrual rate is based on teachers' years of service. So teachers with fewer than 5 years of service earn 1.17 days of annual leave per month, but teachers who have 20 or more years of experience earn 2.17 days per month, so almost double what the beginning teacher earns. LEAs have the authority to set the length of an educator's workday, so the workday is not the same for all teachers, but we scale the annual leave based on the work days, the length of the individual's workday. And so teachers take days or parts of days, but all the annual leave is measured in hours. And we have a process that allows teachers to have a commensurate amount of leave, whether they're going from a job that has an 8-hour day or a 6.5-hour day. So we scale all that accordingly. Teachers also have 10 annual leave days required annual leave days built into the school calendar. So there are 10 days that are designated as annual leave days that teachers must take that day. So if you think back to the beginning teacher, that teacher's earning 1.17 days per month, and that's 11.7 days for a school year. 10 of those days are already used. And so that leaves that teacher with 1.7 days of annual leave per year in excess of that. And those days that time could be taken on a teacher work day or something. So if there's an optional teacher work day, if there's a snow day that's an optional teacher work day, that teacher has one opportunity, basically one and some change, to use an annual leave day on those days. So you can see why it's particularly difficult for beginning teachers in terms of using annual leave or building up annual leave. Certified instructional staff who require a substitute may not use annual leave leave at a time that students are scheduled to be in attendance. So this annual leave is no good when students are in session. And I'll get to how we try to get around that in a minute. Certified instructional staff who are restricted in their use of annual leave accrue what's called personal leave at the same rate of classroom teachers. So for schools, certified staff, if we say you have to be here when students are in session, those educators accrue personal leave at the same rate as regular classroom teachers. So let's move on to personal leave. Personal leave is accrued at a rate of 0.2 days per month by all certified staff who require a substitute when absent. This does not change based on years of service. This is a flat rate for all teachers. A quick multiplication by 10 shows that teachers earn 2 personal days per calendar year that can be used when students are in session. Personal leave must be approved by the supervisor, but we do have a provision that if you give 5 days notice, that leave cannot be denied. The personal leave day cannot be denied by the administrator. Personal leave can be carried over from one fiscal year to the next with a maximum of 5 personal days. So you can only carry 5 personal days from June 30th to July 1st. Anything in excess of that 5 rolls over into sick leave. Incidentally, as does excessive annual leave. If you have in excess of 30 annual leave days in a fiscal year, when it rolls over to the new year, it converts to sick leave. So you're starting to get the picture of why sick leave becomes this large resource for teachers in terms of not being in the classroom when students are in session. I'm trying to say this without judgment or prejudice in any way. This is just a fact that when school is in session, the resource that is, students are in session, if a teacher needs to be out, this is a resource that is available to teachers. Now for sick leave, it is accumulated at a rate of 1 day per month, and it can be accumulated indefinitely. Superintendents reserve the right to require documentation for an employee's use of a sick day. In our understanding of how LEAs operate, this is not a common practice for an incidental sick day. If you're taking a sick day, it is very rare that someone says, please bring a doctor's note when you return to work. And by and large, our districts treat teachers as professionals and assume that if they're taking a sick day, that they are in fact sick. Sick leave may not be paid out upon separation of employment, except in cases of long-term disability. This is a really critical piece here. In the short term, sick leave has no monetary value. It only has value in the long term in terms of retirement. When a teacher separates employment, either from the LEA or from the state, they receive no compensation for the sick leave that has been accrued. It is banked for up to 5 years. If the employee returns to service, that sick leave is reinstated. But if they do not return, for a teacher at 63 months, within 63 months of separation, that sick leave is forfeited and there is no value. So if you think about the way an employee approaches his or her career, if you see a career as a short-term prospect that you're going to do for a little while until you get tired and want to do something different, sick leave can only be monetized by burning it as it is accrued. You would want to use it because it will have no value to you at the time of separation. If you approach the teaching career as a long-term career from which you expect to retire, then saving sick leave and basically accumulating sick leave is a very wise decision. And so what we're experiencing in the state, in the nation actually, is a generation of employees that do not view employment as a 30-year long-term investment. They view it as a series of events. Their employment is a series of perhaps disparate events along their working years. And so this is what we need to think about in terms of leave policy as we move forward. We will continue to see a number of teachers that feel that they must use this resource in order to garner any value from it. And the last slide on sick leave here is a variety, probably the most common uses of sick leave. And you can see they're pretty broad. It could be personal leave for your injury or illness for yourself. Sick leave can be used for the care of a newborn or adopted child. Medical appointments, immediate family illness. We do define what immediate family means. Death in the immediate family, elective medical procedures, or care for an injured military family member. All those are covered under policy, as well as many more. And of course, the discretion is at the local level of the local supervisor, the principal, the school principal, or in some particularly tricky situations, it may be elevated to the superintendent for approval. So that is that's an overview of leave policy for teachers and why sick leave. We're particularly looking at sick leave in terms of chronic teacher absenteeism. We're going to show you some data related to this, and that's where my colleague, Dr. Drake, will come walk you through those data displays. This is very high level. We are not identifying any individual districts or schools in these presentations. We're looking at State Board of Education regions and just general classifications. So what I would like to do is take any questions you might have on our policies, our state policies regarding leave, before I bring up Dr. Drake.
just a quick question. You're saying policy. Are these state board policies, are these state government policies, or are these state law?
It's a combination. So they're all state board policies. What the foundation for the state board policy could be statute 115C, where it's not statute in 115C. We use OSHR policy, which is 126 of the general statute, cover the State Personnel Act, and where we don't have clear direction in 115C, we go back to 126 to understand the leave policies.
Dr. Tomperlin, you made a statement just a minute ago about professionals seeing teaching as a series of events or something to that. Would you clarify that a little bit?
Right. So perhaps it was an overgeneralization, but maybe the new, I think younger, it seems to me, or it seems that the research indicates that younger professionals are not seeing careers as a 30-year prospect, but maybe a series of shorter-term events, and perhaps even disparate events. Like they may be teachers, and then they may go be lifeguards at a beach for 5 years, and do something completely different.
Then
So
return.
I think we are dealing with an orientation or perspective on what a career is that's a little different than what we've experienced in the past.
Very interesting.
Sorry, question?
Go ahead, yes, Mr. McDevitt.
So these are, in some cases, our policies. So as we look at this, we need to glean that in the separate. Let me ask you a technical question.
Sure.
When the legislature from time to time has given leave time in lieu of a pay raise,
Yes,
that's accounted for separately, right?
that is. Bonus leave, yes.
It's called bonus leave. So that's none of the above right here. That's somewhere else in the process here.
That is correct.
Okay.
So those so when the legislature issues bonus leave as part of a incentive package for teachers, they usually clarify how that bonus leave can be used and whether it has an expiration date, whether it can be cashed out as annual leave upon separation. So all those things are indicated. So we actually, when you say bonus leave, there's a lot of different kinds of bonus leave depending on the year that the budget bill issued
know.
it and
That's
what
my
the
point.
conditions are. Yes. So that's tricky.
So there can be a payout there, though,
It depends on
the legislation.
the legislation attached to that particular bonus leave. In some cases, yes. In most cases, yes. I think there are a few cases where the answer is no.
And by the way, on your career point, I would like to point out, don't hold me to these numbers. But some 10 or 12, maybe even 15 years ago, there was a thing called the Competitiveness Council that was part of the Bush administration. I know they worked with the U.S. Chamber, and one of the findings was, or one of the findings was that people will change jobs anywhere from, I think the number was 10 to 12 times in a career, and change careers 3 to 5 times.
Right.
So the teaching profession is not unlike
Right.
society.
I think that's true, but what I'm trying to point out is the way we structure our benefits policies
Yeah.
may be focused
I see.
on
Yeah.
on a 30-year
Yeah.
trajectory and
point.
incent
Yeah.
that kind of behavior.
Yes, Mr. Kavnar.
I was just going to say a comment about the bonus leave well, in my experience, the bonus leave I've received has always been for non-instructional time. And so I assume the reason we're looking at this is how it affects students. And so just keep that in mind, that usually that's something where I could only use it when students are not in session.
That is true of all bonus leave that I've encountered, is that it cannot be used on instructional days.
Tied in a little bit to this discussion, one of the findings in this Fordham study pointed out that part of the reason why we're seeing an increase in teacher absenteeism, whether it's chronic or excessive or what level, it doesn't really matter, is due to generous leave policies that are legislated by general assemblies, by legislators. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of our mind as well. generous leave policies could be a factor in the increase. And if you have 10 days of annual leave or sick leave, teachers are likely to use those days. That's not a kind of a punitive statement. That's just, the findings say that sometimes it's linked to generous leave policies that are legislated.
Yes.
Other questions, Ms. Godwin?
I will say, with the annual leave days, as you stated before, those days are already blacked out for us.
Yeah.
That's right.
We don't have 10 days.
Right.
They're built into your Easter break, your Christmas holiday, and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to make sure that we were aware we really don't have 10 days. They're spoken for already by administration.
Okay, you can, suppose, continue.
Yes, so we'd like to look at some of the data across the state, and to walk us through those data, I would like to introduce Dr. Timothy Drake from North Carolina State.
Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin, Chairman Kobe, Superintendent Johnson, distinguished members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to provide some initial descriptive statistics of chronic teacher absenteeism. As Dr. Oxendine mentioned, we, using the Fordham study, used a broad definition from the Office of Civil Rights regarding chronic teacher absenteeism, and they set their cutoff at 10 days, regardless of how those 10 days showed up for sick or for personal leave. But in this case, for this presentation, we decided to take a more narrow definition of what we'd call chronic teacher absenteeism. So we decided to use 10 non-consecutive sick days within an academic year as somebody who was a teacher that was chronically absent. And again, this does not include those days, this does, include also days that they might take without pay, so leave without pay would be included in this as well as personal days. So we decided to look back at the last 3 years, academic school years, to see what these trends might be. So for the last 3 years, we can see that the percent of chronically absent teachers generally ranges around 21 to 22%. So a little bit of an increase over the time period, though, again, with these 3 years, we could say on average, it's about 22% of the teaching force would have 10 or more of these days, again, non-consecutive sick days that they take throughout an academic year. We decided to look, as Dr. Tomberlin mentioned, by school board region. And this is sort of alphabetized in terms of this graphic, but to give you a sense of the trend, in the western part of the state, chronic teacher absenteeism tends to be lower than as you move east. So if you can look through the graphic there, you can see over time we see a little bit of an uptick in some of these regions. That reflects the difference of 21 to 22% that we saw overall. But you could see the western part of the state, as we move east, that tends to increase. When we look by school report card grade, the story here seems to be the pattern that higher achieving schools have lower rates of chronic teacher absenteeism across all 3 time periods than schools with lower report card grades. So you can see that pattern is consistent across time, across all 3 of these time periods. When we look at EVOS growth, it paints a similar story, though the differences aren't as large. And again, these are just descriptive. So while you do see that the schools that did not meet expected growth, or the teachers, Tom?
This is teachers who teach,
right,
percentage of teachers in those categories.
Within that. That did not meet expected growth, that you could see that they're a little bit higher on average than the others, though these differences aren't as large as the ones we saw by school report card grade. And then when we look by Title I status, again, these trends show a little bit of differences by low performing versus high performing, but in terms of Title I itself, it doesn't seem to be reflective of large differences. Now, this final graphic is trying to give us a sense of the extent to which this is occurring across time. So on the left, we have a pie chart showing the percent of teachers that fall into these categories across the 3 time periods. So the bluish purple part of the pie chart are those who were never chronically absent teachers, and that's about 58% of our teaching force is not chronically absent. And then you can see the yellow section there on the left represents teachers who were chronically absent 1 time during that time period. The green is 2 times, and that magenta is 3 times. So we could see that about 42% of the teaching force has been chronically absent at least 1 year during the time period. And if we look at the next pie chart over, which just looks at the last 2 years, you can see that that trend is continuing. So the percent is higher, of course, at 67% that aren't chronically absent teachers. But as the time trend adds, you can imagine add another year that we might get a similar ratio. So that gives you a sense of how, what percent of our teaching force is marked as chronically absent or has these sick days. And with that, we can take time for questions and comments.
Yes, Ms. White.
Did you explore a range of data focused on number of years of teaching experience? So did the degree of absenteeism increase or decrease relevant to the number of years of teaching experience? My suggestion would be that young female teachers in the first 10 years of their career might possibly be absent, not because they are choosing to be absent, but because they are of childbearing age and have young children for which they are responsible and need to be at home. So is there any discrepancy in the data that might give clarity?
Sure. So 2 points. The first is they wouldn't show up for maternity leave. So if it was strictly for maternity leave, they wouldn't be accounted. But you're right, with sick children, that might be part of it. The second point is we haven't looked by experience, but yes, that's exactly, I think as Dr. Tomberlin outlined the policies, that is certainly a variable you'd want to explore to look at differences by experience, and we have some hypotheses related to what we might see, and you mentioned a good one as well.
Other questions? Mr. Alcorn?
I was surprised to see that it's greater than 20% of all the teachers. Yeah. Were you?
Well, so the Fordham study, and again, they're using a looser definition, or a broader definition, I should say, for the OCR, which is just 10 days total. It could be consecutive days. It could be, you were sick for a week, 5 days. So their rates were around 28%. So having a more narrow definition, that comes down to 20%. So in terms of high or low, I guess thinking of the data, the research more broadly, it seems to be in line with what we're seeing nationally. Though again, we're using a different definition.
Is it also kind of an early warning system? If a teacher is chronically absent, do they normally have less of, or more likely to be replaced?
That's, again, more outcomes that would be wonderful to explore. And that's kind of the feedback we're hoping to receive is if the board is interested in pursuing this further, these are the types of questions that we would want to ask and start to address.
2 more questions. One,
You may.
the greater than 10 is the cutoff. Are there ultra chronically absent when they are 20 and 30 and 40 days? Are there degrees of absence, chronic absenteeism?
So I will say from the national data, we tend to see that a lot of the absences are driven by a smaller percentage of teachers. Yeah. So it's the extremely absence that tend to skew that. This was just a flag indicator. We could break it up by degrees. So we chose 10 or above. But
Last question. Is there a cost to the school? Is there a monetary cost that can be measured for unanticipated absentee, meaning and it's a layup question, I think. But is it you'll get a substitute, right? If somebody's absent.
That's right. So there is a cost for the LEAs. There is, the funds that they're using state funds to pay for these substitute teachers, and there's also the additional there's some other additional costs, but well, that's one of the things we would want to look at in a deeper dive into this, is what is it really costing these districts in terms of state funds that could be used in other areas. So what are the opportunity costs for the LEAs that experience high levels of teacher chronic absenteeism?
Superintendent Johnson, that'd be something to go for, to do the opposite and say, give incentives, or are there bonus plans? Is there something we can do that makes it to where there's a reward system instead of a penalty system for the schools? That's all I got.
Ms. Willoughby?
Well, and I appreciate that the superintendent has been very supportive this year of the teacher working conditions survey. And this seems like another good place to bring up, if you want to know what's going on, we might ask teachers. And, I don't know if teachers had a role in this report, or if you interviewed teachers or talked to anyone who's actually in the classroom about it. There's some flags to me about things that come up, and I'm sure Mr. Kavanaugh or other teacher of the year down there, y'all can give us some insights. But, we could look at our teacher working conditions survey and look at the overlays here, because what we know is, North Carolina has used that survey longer than anyone in the nation. We've used it since 2002. It was an initiative of, the Easley administration. I appreciate that the superintendent has signed on to support participation in it. We've had the highest levels of participation over the years in the nation, and what we've learned is leadership in the school is the #1 issue. And so I think it could be interesting to look at some other data that we already have about schools and how teachers feel about their schools. And we already require the use of the data gleaned from that survey in our school improvement plans. So, do we address this in our school improvement plans? What else is going on here that we might learn from some data we already have, and how we use that data to, we require, you can talk more eloquently about this than I can, but we require use of that data from this survey in our training of school administrators, and, all those things. This isn't probably, and I appreciate Ms. White raising a very valid and important part of this, because the female teachers, young female teachers, probably, it would be interesting to see how that showed up on here. But there's a lot of data we have, and this isn't another one of those, standalone things. What else is going on?
One of the findings also in the study was that school culture and staff morale make a big difference, either positively or negatively, in terms of absenteeism among not just teachers but among the staff. So the TWC data can't be overlooked in bringing about change or making improvements where problems exist in our school systems. Dr. Williamson.
Yes, thank you. To Mr. Alcorn's point, with No Child Left Behind, most LEAs did have an attendance bonus, and work, encourage folks to really be sick or feel bad, kind of worked on that definition. The other part of it is, I think it's the mindset of a lot of teachers and individuals. Is this an earned benefit for me, so I have a right to? I understand the thinking and mindset. And then I think the third part is LEAs recognize this issue, and so we really changed how we employ substitutes. Now send them through lesson planning, lesson design, that whole piece. So we really have to get certified to be in the classrooms. And I think that's why you don't see that gap in performance, because we're doing a better job of identifying and training subs to fill in.
Thank you. And Mr. McDevitt, and then Ms. White. And
Bobby.
Tom, this is more complicated and complex than it needs to be. I mean, it's just, I agree with you. We've got a transition. I'm surprised that I'm beginning to understand what Greg says, but I did understand what you said. You're right. That's, but the 20% thing did surprise me as well. But I think a deeper dive on, if this is pervasive, and the superintendent and all of us together decide that this is something we need to jump into, there are a lot of unanswered questions, and that we can dive into. East-west, that thing is pretty significant there. There's got to be a reason. And maybe more snow days for all I know. There are a lot of things there. I don't think it's the liberal policy because of the nature of just how limited the teachers are in terms of discretion and flexibility. But the teacher working condition survey could be a piece of that. I think is important. So if we dig deeper, I've been saying this for 10 years without any success, so I'll just say it again. I suspect that if we could have a conversation about shifting away from the agrarian model to quote unquote year-round schools, and I don't like that term, but we got to figure out what another term for it in this state, and shift to 12-month contracts for teachers with a quantum leap in pay, and tie into that package professional development, serious, focused professional development, and tie into that package remediation for kids. I suspect that a lot of the questions around this will go away because a school leader can manage the time and manage when that time is off, just like we do in a lot of other professions. But I think it would go away. I think we need a serious conversation in that regard, and I'd hope that sometime as we move forward that we can have that conversation and it would take a multi-year transition, but it's entirely different model. I believe that some state's going to do it, and when that state does it, the workforce is going to be prepared ahead of any other state. So I hope we'll look at all of those issues.
Ms. White and Mr. Kavnar next.
I agree with many of the things that you said, Mr. McDevitt. And Mr. Williamson, to your comment about the earned benefit, my question would be, is it fair to identify a teacher as chronically absent if it's allowed in the policy? So what we have here is a system that says it's okay to take that day once a month, and then we're going to turn around and say, well, you're doing that because it's allowed, and now we're going to label you chronically absent. So that's not really fair. I think that points us towards a policy discussion. And then the second part of what we've set up is that you're forcing our professional educators to only take the days off when they have the opportunity for collaboration. Sure. And that focus on, particularly at the elementary level, for teachers among same grade levels to collaborate among best practices, at the high school level for teachers who are in same subject matter. And so we've got a system here that, because teachers do need that personal time sometime, it forces them to take those days when they could otherwise be working together to provide the best environment for our students. So some more robust discussion about what we're allowing. And then the third comment, and I'll be quiet, is how different is what we have for our employees different than what other state employees would be offered. And reconciling the differences between those two, I think, may help us provide the best environment for our educators. They're professionals.
And Mr. Kavnar.
I have just 2 points. First, going back to Ms. White's original point about childcare, I don't think we can overstate how many teachers are the primary caregiver for children. And that's like myself, because I'm married to a working woman who works long hours in a professional job, and therefore I, because of my position as a teacher, have the flexibility to take the kids home from school, get them their snack, cook dinner, clean up, take them to swim practice, do those things. And so what ends up happening is often teachers are the ones who are looked at as kind of the mom, so to speak. And so whenever the kid is sick, it's the teacher who stays out. And it's just sort of expected that, oh, well, I'm the teacher, so I can get a sub, and so you have so many teachers who are parents because of the flexibility teaching gives them. And that means that often we are the caregivers for children. So it'd be interesting to look at these numbers and say, how often is it that it's because of a child who is sick or because of childcare? The other point I wanted to make is often, say my wife's job, she can leave for 2 hours if she needs to take a kid to a doctor's appointment. Where for me, finding a substitute for 2 hours or 3 hours is nearly impossible. It's either all day or nothing. And so it's very difficult to find subs, period. But finding a half-day sub or a sub just for this little block of time, it can be very complicated. And so what we'll often do is simply take the whole day because I have to take my daughter to a doctor's appointment in the afternoon. And that's not ideal, but it often is what we're left with being able to do. We just don't have flexibility, and that could be something that LEAs could look at. One thing we did in Florida, where I came from, was we had a permanent sub in each school who would travel from room to room if a teacher needed to be out for 2 hours to take a doctor's appointment or something like that, where that's something that I think professionals are often granted the ability to leave for just a little bit during the day to go out and do an appointment and come back. And that might cut down on that.
Are there other questions or comments? I guess my question is, do we want to look further at this topic? And if we do, in order to answer some of the questions, and I don't know that we'll ever have a pure study on causals and some of those variables, but to answer some of the questions that have been raised today in this presentation, we probably need to look at something more qualitatively in terms of a study. I would like to kind of get a sense of if the board is interested in moving in that direction, because Dr. Tomberlin has the expertise and the resources at NC State and right here in our building to pursue this further. So I'm getting a few nods. Good. Dr. Williamson.
Yes, and I hope as we move forward, we again pick up the issue of mental health, not only of our students, but of our employees, that stress level, what contributes to that, because I think that's an important part of this study.
Yeah, I agree.
Critical part of it.
I'm really proud of this presentation and the time that's been given to developing it, because I feel like maybe, I don't know, maybe other states are looking at this issue, but I know we've begun to do so in this presentation today. So we could be out there, who knows, among the 50 states and looking deeply and coming up with, if not policies, but some recommendations to help. That's what it's going to be about. It's about help. Absolutely, some goals. And let me just leave you with with this comment that comes from the study. It's a very simple statement that I know we understand and we believe in, but it says this: students learn less when their teachers aren't there. Another statement: teachers, this just goes to my heart. Teachers are the most powerful instruments that schools have to boost student learning. So that says so much about the role of the classroom teacher. We can't do it without them. Lisa?
I just want to say, traveling across the state during this year has just been such a blessing to me. And to get to speak to teachers and to hear their feelings and their thoughts in a way that they feel safe and secure. And I have encouraged them to take the teaching working survey so their voices can be heard on the next level, not just with me. But I think that if they feel valued, then they will value walking into their classroom every day. And I think that we're missing that element. And I don't feel like they feel important, or that they feel that we view them in a sense that they are those instruments of change. So in order to change the mindset and to have teachers really feel that this is a profession that is viable for a 30-year period of time, we've got to change the narrative, and we've got to do things that are innovative and push the envelope on, elevating this profession and making it what it used to be in the eyes of society.
Thank you so much. Mr. Davis, any comments, closing comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine, Dr. Tomberlin. We'll move forward here, and it is apparent that chronic teacher absenteeism is a problem in many areas and in need of attention from the standpoint of simply calling attention to it and to beginning to determine steps we can take to address it. Board members, we have now come to our committee meetings, and I recognize Mr. Eric Davis for our Student Learning and Achievement Committee. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Eric Davis, along with my colleague, Dr. Oxendine. We chair the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. We have one action item tomorrow, alternative charter school request for an alternative accountability model. This item was presented to us last month and hasn't changed since that presentation. Any questions or discussion on this item? Seeing none, we will act on this tomorrow. We have two action on first reading items. SLA 2, 2018 invitation to submit textbooks for evaluation and adoption for our K-8 mathematics. And I'll turn to, I believe, Dr. Wilson Norman.
Good morning. State Superintendent, Mr. Johnson, Chairman Colby, and members of the State Board. This morning, we present the invitation to submit textbooks for evaluation and adoption in North Carolina K-8 mathematics. This item is being presented for action on first read. There are 4 attachments that you have. The first attachment is the collection of all the State Board policies associated with textbooks. The second are the general statutes associated with the textbook process. The third attachment is the invitation that includes timelines, criteria sheets, requirements, and bid information. And the fourth attachment is actually the PowerPoint presentation. Why K-8 and not K-12 mathematics? Adoption of the standards, curriculum, and instruction team are still working on the level 4 mathematics for high school. So we will bring at a later time the adoption for high school mathematics. As part of today's presentation, you will also receive the required ethical and legal training associated with the textbook adoption process. Dr. Camilla Fair will conduct this training for us today. If we think about what has been done thus far with the textbook process, last month we spoke briefly about how we were working to modernize the textbook process and move us to more digital. So last month we talked about how we were aligning the textbook process to the newly adopted review, revision, and implementation of the North Carolina Standards Policy. We also talked about how we updated the criteria sheets through collaboration with Standards, Curriculum, and Instruction, and Digital Teaching and Learning to focus more on digital resources in our process. We are also in the process of investigating an online platform that will save time in the review process, and so we are building that out so that we can use that as we go through our adoption process. And we have also updated the contract language and State Board policies for greater focus on digital content. So those are the steps that have been taken to help modernize the process. We want to walk through the process that will occur this year for the adoption of K-8 math and also conduct the ethical and legal considerations as we go through the process. Dr. Camilla Fair will outline the steps that we will take to do the K-8 math adoption.
Good morning, Chairman Colby, Superintendent Johnson, and members of the board. So we want to talk to you just a little bit about the textbook adoption process and really highlight those important policies that have an either ethical or legal context to them so that you're aware of those. This is just a high-level overview of the textbook adoption process. There are other elements to it, and of course, if you've looked through the invitation or if you do have time later to do that, you'll see all the pieces. But these are the high-level pieces. We have the invitation, which you have a copy of, that goes to the publishers so that they can submit bids. It has all of that information and all the details they need there, as well as dates. And then we also, at some point in the summer, will have the actual evaluation of those bids that the publishers submit. That will be conducted by our textbook commissioners and then teachers that they select. And once that process occurs, then there will be recommendations that will be made back to you all as a group for your consideration for adoption. And the end result of all of this is that we should obtain high quality instructional materials at the lowest cost. based on the most favored nations clause, because publishers are required to submit prices that are the lowest in the nation. So our schools know, our districts and schools know that if something has made our adopted list, that should be the lowest price that they would be able to find those materials and resources for. So let's start with the public school laws. Again, this is just a high-level overview of some of the main ones. Of course, we know that we have a textbook commission, so those commissioners are first recommended by our state superintendent and then appointed by our governor. The commission works to evaluate those textbooks that the publishers or the materials and resources the publishers submit. They're responsible for the final evaluations, but they can't do their work without the help of classroom teachers. So they do work with classroom teachers. They identify them and bring them into the process so that they can in turn review the materials and then provide their recommendations. And then the textbook commissioners use that information for final evaluations, and then they present the recommendations to your group. So we have a policy that defines textbooks, that's 115C85, and hopefully everybody is familiar with that or you've looked at that in the materials. And so we have a very broad definition for textbooks, and so that's been under conversation during our modernization conversations and meetings. We also have policy that directs the selection and adoption, that you all are able to do that and that you entrust that process to DPI to conduct all the logistics and the meetings and things concerned. And then also that you are required to develop those rules and procedures that publishers must follow in order to submit those bids, but also in signing contracts. So that's included in your board policy as well as described in the invitation. This is just a snippet of the schedule, the tentative schedule that's in the invitation. It outlines the dates from beginning from today all the way through when the publishers need to submit their bids, when the evaluation sessions occur, and then when the information comes to the state board. Now looking at the state board policies that guide textbook adoption, we have our invitation, so we do have a policy that indicates that we'll have those criteria sheets that are aligned to our standard course of study. And of course they have other pertinent information and criteria based on specific content area. We also have that criteria included in the invitation, and then textbook commission members and teachers utilize that information to make their decisions about alignment to standards and quality. We have an NC Publishers Registry, and only those companies that are on the registry receive the notice through a listserv email that goes out. The invitation is published on the web, but the criteria is that a publisher has to be on our Publishers Registry, not only to receive the invitation through the Publishers Registry, but to also submit materials for adoption. So they would have to be on the registry for that to occur. If publishers make undue pressure, then we do have some consideration for what would happen, and that would be toward either state board members, textbook commission members, our evaluation advisors who are our teachers, and then DPI staff. So by undue pressure here, we mean if they are advocating for selecting a specific book or series of book or whatever resources they may have that are up for adoption. And that doesn't include social contact or presentations or written communication. So there's some things that you could still do, but it's having that pressure to adopt certain things that cannot happen. And then this is a consideration that is often called our blackout period. At no time during the adoption process, and that's from the time that the invitation is approved until the actual list of materials are adopted, may either commission members, state board members, teachers, or department staff be involved in the submission, evaluation, or adoption process, meet privately with publishers. So there's no private meetings that may occur with the publishers from the time you approve, which we hope is tomorrow, until the time we come back to you with that adopted list. That does not include public type meetings, but it would be personal and private and individual type meetings that you would avoid. Also looking at State Board of Education operations, the standards of conduct, which I know you all are very well familiar with, making sure that there's the personal conduct is at highest standards and that there's no actual or perceived conflicts of interest, which is a big thing if it's perceived, and then also avoiding solicitation or acceptance of any promise or favor or reward. So what happens after the invitation is approved? Well, the publishers will, and this is all outlined in the tentative schedule, they'll develop their sample materials and they'll have a time when they need to submit samples for the textbook commissioners, and then also the samples for the summer evaluation. And then those commission members that we have on board determine how many teachers we need. They typically base that on the number of bid submissions that we receive. We try to be sure that there are at least 3 to 5 teachers that review each set of material, because the review is subjective, so there'll be times when there may be agreement and sometimes not. So we try to make sure that there are multiple reviewers who are looking at all of the resources so that we can come out with the best evaluation. And then our adopted materials from the process would be made available during the 2019-20 school year. And that's just a high-level overview of all the materials that you've received, the policies, state board policies, school laws, as well as the invitation, and then the other information you have. So at this time, does anybody have any questions for me or Dr. Wilson-Norman?
Questions from my colleagues on this item? Dr. Williamson.
Yes, thank you. Good information. You know, one of the concerns from LEAs is the vetting of digital content. We think there's a gap. I'm not sure at the local level that we can do that. We just want to make sure that's part of the process, and there's a different criteria that we have.
So yes, as Dr. Norman Wilson mentioned, we did have some collaboration between our digital teaching and learning colleagues and our CNI, and part of our modernization of the process is to continue that conversation, to look at what other states may be doing, as well as just consideration of digital overall.
Questions? Mr. McDivitt.
Can we buy these textbooks after we approve them? We have the money?
Oh, we as in the state of North Carolina?
Yes.
Mr. Levinson?
Question.
Somewhat rhetorical question, but you know.
Sort of a challenge to answer that question. It would be up to each district, of course, as Dr. Williamson knows, to as they always have, to decide how to pool and or bank those textbook dollars. There are certainly fewer textbook dollars appropriated annually than there used to be, but they're
Yeah, we've seen an increase this year with an emphasis on the digital content material. But from companies, you can no longer buy those applications and apps. You got to buy the subscriptions, which means it's costly from year to year. So, but there has been, but to answer your question, it's going to be limited in what we can buy. That's why the content material is so critical for us.
Adam, the appropriations for textbooks is still significantly lower than it was 10 years ago?
Yeah. It is, and you have in your budget requests, you have
yes.
Several times asked for closing that gap or restoring it to those levels.
Right.
Other questions? Dr. Oxendine.
Just a quick question. I wonder, do you ever explore what other states are doing in the area of textbook adoptions? Because the whole world of textbooks, especially with the added piece to the digital resources, has just gone in a very different direction.
It has, and we do, we're actually members of a state group. We're people who do what I do in terms of textbook adoption. We come together and we share resources and information, and then we have access to webinars where there's conversation about digital things or open educational resources. And so we're in the national conversation, and then also we're members of the CETA organization, and we also have access to the DMAPS information, which outlines the digital usage by other states. And so that's a part of our modernization, is to also to continue to review those things and see what we can kind of glean from in terms of moving our process forward to more digital.
Is there a state that stands out in your mind? I mean, I'm just interested in where the nation's going in this discussion about textbooks, because I was reading some information recently, a short study down from South Carolina. It seems to be similar issues there.
Yeah.
In our southern states.
I think there are similar issues in the southern states. Do you have a state in mind, Dr. Wilson-Norman? I don't have a particular state in mind.
I just think we need to learn from other places.
When we dug into many of the states and attended a CETA workshop, Utah seems to have some things on the move, but many states are really focusing and building on that open educational resource area to really think about how can we also attack resources in that manner. But we are looking at how other states are getting more digital resources through this process. And so we have a team that's assembled as we continue to work on what we're calling modernizing the process. And that will have us looking at some of our policies, some of the statutes, to really make sure we're real clear on how we can get more digital resources for our school districts.
In the hands of students, because I hear it every day in my work at the university, because I teach teachers and we don't have books, we don't have resources. So keep that up. I mean, keep watching the nation on that and reporting back to us would be good.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the training. This will be back before us tomorrow for action. We have one other action on first reading, which is State Advisory Council on Indian Education. We have a nominee to fill a vacancy, and I'll turn to our liaison, Dr. Silver.
Good morning, Chairman Kobe, Superintendent Johnson, school board members, staff, and guests. Today, the first item that's coming before you on behalf of the State Advisory Council on Indian Education is to fill a vacancy that was left by Ms. Shanoa Davis, who filled an educator spot on that council. For those of you who may not be as aware, what happens with this process is that it's legislated that it have a certain amount of members, half educators and half parents. Those nominations come from the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. They have moved forward the name of Ms. Angela Richardson. You have her application, which includes a brief personal statement about her. I can tell you she is a member of the Halawassaponi tribe. She is a career educator. As I shared with the committee members, she was actually my Indian education teacher. So not to tell her age, but that tells you a little bit. She has been teaching for 30 plus years, and she is currently a technology teacher. We are asking for action on first read, and that's the nomination that the Commission of Indian Affairs has moved forward.
Thank you. Comments or questions on this item? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have 4 discussion items. First is SLA 4, which is revision to the policy requiring end of course to count at least 20% of a student's final grade. And I'll turn to Dr. Howard for this item.
Thank you and good morning. SLA 4 this month is addressing a situation that is not new to the state or to our schools, and that is anytime we implement a new assessment in a school year, we are unable to provide student-level results from that assessment until we actually go through what you're familiar with as the standard setting process. And in looking forward to 2018-19, our next opportunity to do this will be the implementation of our new mathematics assessments, both grades 3 through 8 and high school. And so we begin early reminding our stakeholders and our colleagues across the state that there will not be any data available until after the standard setting process and the summer of 2019. This is particularly important for our high schools because of a state board policy that requires the application into the student's final grade for any course associated with an end of course assessment or with an NC final exam course, the requirement that 20% of their final grade be calculated based on the performance on that assessment. So in discussions and anticipating having to go through this process again with 2018-19, we were wanting to recommend to the board to go ahead and put that process in policy so that it's not a reminder to all of us every time that we go through this, but it's a standard practice. And I think the clarification there is that it is a practice. It is an ongoing practice. It is not something that is new to how we conduct business with accountability in that initial implementation of a test. But this will put that in board policy, and that will help affirm that this is a standard practice that will always be in place every year that we implement new assessments. And particularly just in reference to us, we have change in staff, both here at the department and across the state. It serves as a concrete reminder and practice of how we proceed anytime we implement new assessments and do not have data to provide calculation for the 20%.
Very good. Questions on this item? Discussion? And it'll be back before us next month for action. Thank you, Dr. Howard.
Thank you.
Our next discussion item is the annual report from the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. And I'll turn to Dr. Silver again for this item.
Good morning again, everyone. Again, my name is Susan Silver. I am the agency's liaison to the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. Part of the law states that this council will submit an annual report to the state school board with recommendations for how to move forward, and also giving an overview of the performance of American Indians in the state. As I shared with you all last year, I'm a member of the Halawasponi tribe, and I'm a product of Indian education. I currently work with Educator Support Services, working with some of our lower performing schools in the state, which, not coincidentally, is where a lot of our American Indian students unfortunately are. So I consider it coming full circle to be able to do this work and engage in it with the council. At this time, I'm going to introduce to you the chair of the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, which is Dr. Connie Locklear, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. It's been my great pleasure to work with her over the last 8 months. She was elected chair back in September and has been doing tremendous work with that group, and she's going to share some of that today. But Dr. Connie Locklear works with the public schools of Robeson County. She is their Indian Education Director. She is to tell you about Indian Education, Title VI, specifically the federal program. You cannot ask for anyone with more knowledge and expertise in that area. I've heard her present, and it makes my head spin when she starts going through all those things. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to go through some of the data, share some of the work that the council is doing. Then she'll end with recommendations and take questions. And through that discussion, or either the end, she'll also discuss some of the factors that we believe the council has discussed is contributing to the data that you see before you. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Locklear.
Good morning, State Superintendent Johnson and Chairman Kobe and all of members of the State Board. Thank you for this opportunity and all of our distinguished guests in the audience. I am Connie Locklear. I'm a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, and I'm also director of the Indian Education Director. I'm the Indian Education Director for the Public Schools of Robeson County. My background is mathematics, so I understand numbers very well. So, go to the next slide. Our mission, as you can see, the mission of the State Advisory Council on Indian Education is to create a system that engages all of our stakeholders, our state policy leaders, our public school personnel, our parents, our tribal leaders, and all of the tribal communities as well, in order to provide an educational experience and cultural opportunities that will help promote high expectations for all of our American Indian students. Our vision, when we look at our vision, we want every American Indian student in North Carolina to graduate not only academically rigorous but culturally relevant, so that they can go in there, they can be productive citizens of their society and never forget their culture. As you can see, this is a map of where our American Indian students reside in North Carolina, and we have 8 state-recognized tribes, 1 federally recognized tribe, which is the Eastern Band Cherokee of Cherokee Nations. This is one piece that we really want to highlight. This is the Culturally Responsive Teaching Professional Development Module. And this module has been in the works for several years now. The purpose of this module is to give teachers and educators all across the state of North Carolina an eye's view of our culture and to understand the 8 state-recognized tribes. Because we have students, American Indian students, in all of our schools across this state. And when we understand that student's culture, we open the door for them to have a voice. And it's very important for our children to have a voice. And so the purpose of this module is to make everyone aware, all of our educators aware of our 8 state-recognized tribes. As you can see, we have 392 views to date, and the module just opened in January. This work has been taking place for many years. It actually started before I came on the board, so we're very proud of this. We're asking that all of our teachers be aware of this across the state, all of our educators. And when they complete this module, they receive 1 CEU credit. This is the theme of our report. Our report is Growing Sacred Wisdom Keepers Through Connections to American Indian Culture and Education. And as you can see on the front of the cover, we have a bunch of our students that are highlighted across the state. When we begin to look at the data, as I said, my background is math, and the numbers speak for themselves. As you can see, for EOG reading, our American Indian students are falling behind their white counterparts or their Caucasian counterparts 27.8 percentage points. And when we look at math, the numbers are there 27.3%. When we go down to each of these areas, The 4-year cohort graduation rate, we have 4.9% difference in the percentage points. And in the dropout rate, it is 0.61% difference in the percentage points. These are the summary of our key findings for EOGs. We went back to 2014, 2015, and as you notice, we can see some increase. The increases are small for our American Indian students, but we do have some increases here. And same with the EOG math. We were at 36.0 in EOG math, and we have now moved to 40%. When we look at the key findings for our EOCs in 2014 for math, our students were, American Indian students were at 42.6. In 2016-17, they were at 49.3. For biology, 41.1 to 42.3, 44.2, and in 2016-17, increase of 44.9. The graduation rate is one of the areas that is one of the highlights. If you look at one time, the American Indian males had the highest dropout rate in the state, and not only in the state but in the nation. And for the state, that has changed. So the dropout rates have declined on 1.27 percentage points since the 2014-15 school year. When we look at our AP exams, this was a discussion that we had within our committee. A lot of our students, especially in our county and a lot of the other counties, are taking college and career courses. So a lot of our students are no longer taking AP exams. Two of our Title VI programs, or two of our tribes within the state, received a demonstration grant from the Office of Indian Education. And for the Lumbee tribe, that grant allows our students to take college and career courses. Is not only, well, the college and career courses are free, but what we were finding is a lot of our students were not taking those courses because the distance to get to the local community college and having to travel there and the purchase of the books. So through that grant, they now pay for travel and they pay for the purchase of the books. So more of our students are taking the college and career courses than taking the AP exams. When we look at our SAT and our ACT scores, we also see that our students are falling behind in that area. And there was a change in the SAT, as you're aware of, and so that is kind of hard to compare from 2014-15 to 2016-17. These are our recommendations. You will notice that these recommendations are very similar to last year. We did not change a lot. The first one, we just changed to strongly encourage. It's the same recommendation. We are strongly encouraging, we ask that the board strongly encourage, identify low-performing districts and schools that enrolled American Indian students to develop goals and activities that will specifically address the academic achievement of these American Indian students and their improvement plans. And these school improvement plans are required to submit to the state. So if they use the manual and look at their goals and objectives as it relates to the American Indian students before they submit those plans, then that's a way to making sure that our students are identified. If we look at the next one, we want to continue to use the Stasi Report. Last year, the report was listed that we would have this report included. This year, we ask that they continue to use this report as they develop their school improvement plans. We've also asked last year that districts would take this report and put it on their school websites and make sure they shared it with the entire school district. Some districts have done that, and we're very proud of that piece. When we go to the next piece, we're looking, this is the piece we want to strongly encourage all DPI staff and all educators to make sure that they're really aware of the American Indian populations. And we said that that is going to really take place with the development of this PD module. We think that that module is going to really help our educators across the state understand the American Indian culture in North Carolina. And so we want to make sure that that is strongly encouraged to all of our educators across the state. And it also goes back to teaching standard number 2. When we go to the next module, we're looking at the American Indian Heritage Month, or recommendation, the recommendation. We want to make sure that this recommendation, that we recognize American Indian Heritage Month, but not only talk about American Indian culture during that month. it should be embedded all through the year. It should be a part of that classroom all the time so that that student feels that their voice is heard and that they're not isolated and they're not eliminated because of the American Indian culture. So we're hoping that the PD will reinforce that. We think that that's really going to be beneficial for our educators. We have educators that come in sometimes and they just don't understand our culture. So the development of this PD is one piece that we're very proud of. And the next recommendation, encourage the current Stasi Report to be widely disseminated across all of our school districts, as we said earlier, making sure that it's posted on our websites, and that schools and districts that serve American Indian students are utilizing the report. And the last one, this goes back to Every Student Succeeds Act, and we have been working closely with DPI and with Dr. Silver. She has been truly wonderful to work with, and making sure that we're meeting the needs as it relates to Every Student Succeeds Act and the State Education Agency as it relates to our Title VI programs. These are some very important acknowledgments. Number one, we want to thank the North Carolina State Board of Education for your support of Stasi. We want to thank you for all that you're doing. We also want to thank our Stasi members because they dedicate their time. This is, as you know, this is not a paid committee to serve on, but they dedicate their time to be here. And our North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs for their support. And of course, we could not have gotten this module off the ground if it had not been for DPI. So we really do thank Dr. Peter Martin, everyone at Dr. Silver, everyone at DPI for their support. In the last couple of meetings we've been at with our Stasi members, we've been blessed to have Dr. Martin sitting there at the table, hearing our concerns and supporting us. So we really do thank DPI for their support. Now I'll open the floor for questions and discussions.
Great. Questions from my colleagues?
I got a question.
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes, thanks. This is really helpful information. Thank you for doing this. When I look at this map, it appears that some 23 to 24 counties have Native American presence in their schools. Does the data include the tribal school?
I think, yes, the data includes the tribal school. And also when you look at the map, we have students. A lot of times when we look at the map, we think that the students are only in those communities, but they're not.
Right.
We have students all throughout the state in all of our districts. Yes, sir.
But it does include the tribal school.
Yes.
I assume there's a breakout somewhere behind these numbers that follows each school or the tribe, or how is it that, how do you know that we're making progress in some areas but not in others?
That is one discussion we've had, sir. And one of the issues is, well, I'll just speak to my program, and I think if other Title VI directors were here, they would have the same concern, which we've discussed in the meeting. We have in our Title VI program, our students have to be verified through a 506 form for Washington, for the state, for the Department of Indian Education. When you look at the data as it relates to North Carolina, it states that that in Robeson County there are 9,000 American Indian students. I have over 11,000 students that are verified with a 506 form. Those students, to their scores, so I'm missing, there are 2,000 students that are missing in the data as it relates to the American Indian students. Because some of our students will enroll, and the way the ED 506 form states, if it's on the student's birth certificate that they're American Indian, their mom or dad or the paternal or maternal grandparents, and they qualify for the program. So a lot of districts may have 500 students, but only 300 are listed in North Carolina DPI's data report. So that kind of, from looking at that from a mathematical perspective, the data is skewed.
And to speak to one other thing, each district that has an Indian education program has its own profile. So you are looking at the state averages. That's what we've shared with you today. But if a county has an Indian education program, their data is listed in the same type of chart showing where those gaps are. There is a difference. So when you look at the state averages, that is self-reported / self-identified data. So that's how students chose to identify themselves on their tests. When you look at the profiles of the districts or of the counties, those are students who are enrolled in the Indian education program. So there can be a difference between the two. You might self-identify as American Indian but not be enrolled in that program. So you might show up in the state numbers but not show up in that district profile, if that makes sense.
I guess another, a dig deeper, I don't think, it's no secret that the Eastern Band has resources perhaps that others don't have in terms of focused help, whether it's culture or it's languages. We created the Cherokee Preservation Foundation that does a lot of things to help in that regard. And I really was trying to see if we could glean from their improvement in terms of where those resources are being focused, where there might be some opportunity for focusing of resources in some other places as well. And am I being clear that there's...
Yes, and I don't think it's the tribal school that's on their federal, it's managed federally, it's not included. This only includes school districts that are under management of this of the state board.
Okay, so this data does not include the tribal schools data, and it in terms of the although it's pretty public. I mean, they're where they're focusing their resources. So that might be a place to at least learn some things where focused resources are assisting. So,
Mr. Alcorn.
The total number of students that identify, I heard the 9,000, but I think that was a subset. What is the total number of students that identify as American Indian?
Well, for Robeson County, we have over 11,000.
Yeah.
And we have listed in the data when it comes to North Carolina, DPI data, we have over 9,000. But a lot of those students may enroll in the school and they may list as African American or they may list as Caucasian. But then we find out that their grandparent or one of their parents are American Indian, so they qualify for the program. But when they self-identify themselves on the test, it may be different than the fact that they're enrolled in our program.
So on page 4 of the report, what's received, so this is reporting that's done to our agency, to our financial services. And it's reported there 19,442 American Indian students for the 16-17 school year. Of those, so those are those that self-identified, 15,777 were enrolled in Indian education programs. So that's where it is.
A follow-up question is, as far as the trend that the 0 to 4-year-olds that are identified as American Indian, is that number staying steady? Is it identified? Are you to the point of identifying?
Well, I think there's an issue with all of our Title VI programs now because, as you know, no longer do they put ethnicity on the birth certificate unless the parent requests it. So if it's no longer on the birth certificate, we have to go back to the parent or the grandparent. So eventually it's going to get to a point, unfortunately, unless the parents are requesting American Indian placed on their birth certificate, it's going to be harder to verify that these students are American Indian for the ED 506 form. We've had that discussion with the Office of Indian Education in Washington, and they're looking at different avenues of how we can support that. Right now, as I stated earlier, it has to be on the child's birth certificate, or the parents, or the maternal or paternal grandparents. So those are the ways that we can verify that the child is American Indian.
Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you so much for the presentation. As I say to Stacey, each time I meet with them, this report has come to the state board since about 1988. It's one of our historical reports. I'm very proud of it and extremely proud of Stacey. I want to just also add that Dr. Locklear serves on the Pepsi group. So all of the recommendations that Dr. Seiberg and Dr. Tomberlin bring to us on a regular basis about licensure and educator preparation, she's very much a part of that body of thinkers. So we want to thank her for her contributions in that way. And I believe I see a couple of at least one other Stacey member in the audience. I would like for Ms. Crow, however, I think she has a new name to stand, and she's been a member of Stacey for several years, haven't you, Ms. Crow? We're so happy to have you with us here today. Thank you so much. But my question goes to this. Dr. Locklear, I'm wondering about Southside Ashpole, the school that the Public Schools of Robeson County Local Board transferred out of that governance structure into the state board. What is the percentage, right off the top of your head, of American Indian students?
There are about close to 300 American Indian students that we will no longer be able to serve.
Yeah. American Indian students have been behind in reading and math forever in North Carolina. Since I've been a part of Stasi, since I've been an educator in this state, coming back from another state several years ago, many years, been behind. Speculate with us for a minute. What's going on?
With
reading, math, why does that gap persist?
Well, there are many. When we look, as I said, my background is math, and when we look at the data, the numbers speak for themselves. I think sometimes what we look at things from a quantitative perspective, but when we look at it from a qualitative perspective, there are many factors that play into this. We have students that have gone through schools with no teachers. It's very difficult. My niece did not have a 6th grade math teacher or a 7th grade math teacher. She did not have a math teacher her middle school until 8th grade. And when you have counties where you do not have educators in the classroom, then you can expect these kinds of numbers. I mean, all due respect. I'm a math person, so I was able to help her get through that. But there were many other students. Prior to taking this position, I was the math and science supervisor for the district, and there was another school in our district that did not have a math teacher. So during my tenure as the math and science supervisor, I was in the classroom teaching mathematics. When you have classrooms that are not filled with teachers, it's a whole different, there's another realm of factors that play into this versus schools where they are filled with classroom teachers. And so serving on PEPC, as we talked about earlier, one question that I raised was, when we look at the changes that we're making in the state, please let's not forget our rural communities, because it's very difficult to fill classrooms when you're bordering South Carolina and they're offering you a $5,000 to $10,000 increase to move. And we have students that don't have classroom teachers. So there's so many factors that weigh into this, and this is not to bash anyone, but it's reality. And I'm from Robeson County. I'm invested in that community. My children are both products of Robeson County Public School System. One is a graduate of Chapel Hill. The other one is a graduate of NC State. My daughter-in-law is a product of Robeson County. She is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. She would die if she knew I said NC State. And my son-in-law is a product of Robeson County as well. The three of them before went to, the three earlier I mentioned were at Purnell Sweat. My son-in-law is at South Robeson. He is military. He now works for the federal government, making as much as I do, which is disappointing. But he's doing a really good job. And I would love for, there are a lot of good things. When we look at the data of American Indian students, we just see numbers. But I encourage you to not only look at numbers, but to see faces. Because when I look at this, I see faces. I see my children. When I say my children, it's because I'm invested in the community, not only in Robeson County, but with the Saponi, with the Ochanee, with the Maharian, with the Cherokee, with the Waccamaw-Siouan, with the Halawa-Saponi, with all of our 8 state-recognized tribes. I see our children, and I see so much that they have to offer. So when we look at this data, we see numbers, but I encourage all of us to not just see numbers, but to see children. I see their faces. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for your support of Stasi. I thank you, Dr. Oxendine, for being at our committee meetings and hearing our voices and willing to help us write these recommendations in the correct manner. I thank DPI for your continued support, our Commission of Indian Affairs. I thank every one of you for what you do for our children. And I just encourage you not to forget our children. And that's just not American Indian children. That's our African American children. That's our Hispanic children. That's our Caucasian children. But I am here to speak on behalf of our children, the Stasi Report. So I speak a lot of time from a lot of deep passion, because when I present this, it's not exciting to stand up here to say that our children are falling 27% percentage points behind our Caucasian counterparts. That's not exciting for me. But there are so many other factors that sometimes we miss when we just look at the data.
And one other question, across Robeson County, is a teacher shortage, are we experiencing that today across the county?
Absolutely. I think when you look at a lot of these communities, there's a lot of teacher shortage, especially as I stated early, you know, as you're making reference to Robeson County, and I'm from that area. We're border South Carolina. And when you're right on the South Carolina line and you can drive 10 miles and there's a big jump in salary, you know, people are struggling, and you can't blame someone for that. So, and then, you know, the supplement, you're going across there and you're getting a lot more. So it's very difficult. A couple years ago, we had one school that had 17 substitutes. So those are some of the major factors. When you look at the data, those are some of the major factors that play into our student scores. And that's just not, as I said, that's not just for Robeson County. That's for all of our American Indian communities. Thank you.
Dr. Locklear, thank you for not just this report, but for your leadership in so many ways in helping our American Indian students. We look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our next discussion item, SLA 6, is membership on the Council on Education Services for Exceptional Children, and I'll turn to Mr. Hussey for this item.
Good morning, Mr. Kobe, Mr. Superintendent Johnson, the board. I seem to come back around this issue several times a year, and so I kind of wanted to make sure, again, we had some understanding of why I keep coming back. We've got multiple sets of rotating council members, and I just kind of want to go through that just for a second to reiterate what that is. So we have 24 members as a minimal council. We actually are about 27, 28 people because we've got more parents who've been interested, and we can bring more parents on. 2 members are appointed by the governor, 2 by the president pro tem, 2 by the Speaker of the House, 16 by you, the State Board of Education, and 5 members are referred to as state agency members, and they are appointed through the federal government, specific people such as vocational rehab and others who are part of that. Terms for the state agency members are governed by virtue of their position, so they're different, each one of them. The term of appointments for all members except those appointed by the state board are 2 years, and then the members appointed by you guys are for 4 years with two terms, one following the other. So as you can tell, we just have a mixed bag, and so I'm here a lot to talk about folks coming aboard. At this point, we have 7 vacancies. We have 1 special ed teacher, and these are all ones that can be appointed by the State Board of Education. 1 special ed teacher, 1 special education director, an administrator from the general education side, so a principal or someone in administration on the general ed side, an institution of higher education representative who will be rolling off at the end of June, and then we have 3 parents. Regarding the parents, the districts, and I still go by numbers, I apologize, but District 2, District 4, District 5, District 6, and District 8 do not have parent representatives. So of the 3, they can come from any one of those districts, and we would like recommendations. Mr. Alcorn has sent some recommendations forward. We have recommendations that we have received from the council and from others, individuals out there that we will make sure that Ms. West has out there for all of y'all to look at this month. We would look forward to recommendations next month. And we have some, as I said, we have names out there for actually pretty much every one of these positions. So if you can't find someone in your district that you're and you're interested in making a recommendation, some of these others can be used. So, any questions?
Yeah, Ms. Willoughby.
I just have a couple of comments.
Sure.
I recommended someone who was appointed several years ago to this council, and I spoke to her asking for some recommendations
Right.
to send your way, our way. But I just want to acknowledge that, you know, your leadership has been so valuable, and the person who I won't say who she is because I don't want to embarrass her, but she has really enjoyed being part of this council. She feels like it's been a very positive experience for her and given her a way to be engaged in something really important as we serve our children, especially this population. So I just wanted to publicly thank you. And I also wanted to use this as just an opportunity to quickly mention that a few weeks ago, I heard one of our state leaders mention that a public school had turned away a student with disabilities. And so I asked Bill for some clarification on that. And, you know, that doesn't happen. And I don't want that statement to be out there and become part of anybody's rhetoric, because that doesn't happen. It was one of our little local news shows here in Raleigh, and you know, Bill reassured me and assured me that at no time are services denied or refused to students with disabilities. So I just wanted to put that out there publicly, since it was in a public domain before, but also really thank you for your leadership. And you know, I encourage you to recommend people to this council, because this person has really enjoyed being a part of it.
Thank you for all of that. It really is an active council. It's become much more active over the last 3 to 4 years with leadership from the council, and so we really do enjoy having the opportunity, and they give us very real and very direct feedback. They are not shy. So again, we would appreciate recommendations, and if there are no further questions, thank you.
I do have a question.
The way I did it, I sent in 4 superstars, I think, for this council. Now, I don't know any of them. And the way I did it was I took the description of the council and sent it to about 25 or 30 people on my contact list that were, and that's where it just, this networking of casting that net to where people are doing that. I was just, the superintendent sends out, it may be something we can do with the list that you've got, especially teachers. And if you got tens of thousands of teachers, well, they have a network where they know things. Just a suggestion, and I did, because it worked for me to be able to do that, and it was, and they were from all over the state, which I don't care what district they come from. I just want to give you as many qualified applicants as possible.
And we appreciate it. And it really is, for teachers, it's really a eye-opening experience to actually be sitting among parents and other advocates for special education and hear that, not as a direct application to something they're doing in the district, but in that broader sense, and the concerns that other parents have and the issues that we raise. Teachers a lot of times don't hear that or see that. And so it is, again, something that's very educational and supportive for them, as well as helpful to us.
Mr. McDivitt?
Relative to Trish's comment, over the years, several, both parents and teachers, have served, and I've never had anyone say anything other than a good experience and good opportunity. And I don't have to tell you, these are advocates. Yeah. They advocate for, and I appreciate it, I like it, and I'm delighted with that. With that said, this might have to be a sidebar to ask someone to do a round trip, 600 miles. Been some confusion about reimbursement recently, and I just, again, it has to be sidebar, I guess, at this point, but that there has to be clarity to assure that a parent that's going to make a 600-mile round trip can be reimbursed at least for the travel.
Well, and I don't know where that confusion is, because they do get...
It's bigger than this.
Okay, because I was going to say, they certainly get travel forms each time they show up and submit them, but we'd be glad to have that conversation.
Other comments? Well, let's follow Mr. Alcorn's lead and get our nominees in. So thank you, Mr. Tyson.
Okay, thank you.
Our last item is early warning system for early identification of at-risk children, and I'll turn to Dr. Jablonski.
Thank you very much, and good morning, and I'll bring you into the good afternoon as well in the item. So good morning, Superintendent Johnson and Chairman Kobe and members of the board. Can I have PowerPoint 1 up? The other one, the one that has the content. Thank you very much, Lawrence. So attachment 2 has the PowerPoint that I'll be going through today. And I want to set the stage that at first I'm going to take a little trek back to talk about why I'm here. It's actually asking to revise a policy that Bill Hussey brought forward March of 2016. And the revision is to add a component to it. And the component we'll be talking about today is an early warning system that's part of a larger system of one of Bill's big ideas that he has called the Every Child Accountability Tracking System, or ECATS. And so today I want to go through some common language and historical context to set the stage, discuss what an early warning system is and what that will look like in North Carolina, and then talk about the implementation plan. So for some common language and historical context, the Every Child Accountability Tracking System, ECATS, has 3 components to it, modules, if you will. And just for, to start off, all of this is free to every district and charter. So I want to put that out there to begin with. There's the special education component, the service documentation, known as also Medicaid, and a multi-tiered system of support. I'm going to walk through each of these. At the end, focus on the multi-tiered system of support one. Overall, ECATS has these 3 integrated modules. It's user-friendly in that users will sign on with a single interface and can experience whatever they have access to. We're working directly here at the state level with PowerSchool for data. And then the whole goal is to make sure that we improve student success for all students. And the special ed module is really focused on students with disabilities, but as you'll see, that they'll be part of the entire early warning system that we have. So the special education module, that's already part of the Unified Education Reporting System. Again, Bill brought that forth in March 3rd, 2016, or also known as the UERS. This part right here, which is already approved by you to have there, is a collection of reporting and student information with students with disabilities. It guides users through creating individual education plans in compliance with state and federal regulations. It helps with creating a really good conversation between the Department of Public Instruction and end users in the LEAs for compliance issues without having to go through lots of barriers. And it also allows for meeting documentation to be there and our students to have the same type of experience as they move across the state. The other component is service documentation, also known as Medicaid. This allows service providers at the LEA or school level just to log or document the services that they have performed. They can then, by LEA choice, if they choose to, can bill for those services. That's not part of this system. The documentation only is. The billing piece is an LEA decision, either with a third-party vendor or maybe something else they have for self-submit. And this is optional for use and not part of the UERS. So now let's move to the MTSS part, which obviously is my realm of the world. The multi-tiered system of support module within ECATS is comprised of 3 components: the early warning system, an intervention planning system, and just overall analytics and reporting. So the proposal I'm bringing forth today is to add the early warning system component to the already established policy that Bill brought forth for ECATS, to put that in the Unified Education Reporting System. Again, at no cost to the districts, and I'll walk through what does this mean for the districts, what does it look like, but that's the proposal today. Even though MTSS has 3 distinct components that I'll show you do connect with each other, it's the early warning system bringing forth for today's discussion. So let's just talk about what is an early warning system first. Let's get some common language. We have the purpose of an early warning system is to identify students who are at risk as early as possible, so that way we can intervene to alter student trajectories. And I think that though this was not planned, I'm assuming, but having the previous presentation on the State Advisory Council of Indian Education really actually lends nicely to talking about the need for an early warning system. This also allows for districts and schools to identify patterns over time. And so also to put this, we're talking about pre-K through 12. Other states have talked about early warning systems district by district, or maybe a particular grade level span. Here in North Carolina, we know that pre-K through 12 is the best early warning system we could have because that encompasses all of our students and able to intervene as early as possible. The goal is to provide the right intervention at the right time. So an early warning system is comprised of indicators. Kind of like our health is comprised of different indicators, our blood pressure, our weight, or whatever it happens to be. And that's how an early warning system is built. It has different indicators. And all these are is taking a look at research to say a student may be at risk by this indicator. And we just need to take a look at it. It doesn't prescribe what to do. It just says, we need to take a look here. There's a warning that a student may be off track in a certain area. And what we were able to do in North Carolina is set state thresholds. Because what we find is that the state or the national research has the same thresholds, and we want to make sure that the level of risk is known for all of our students as they move across our state. So no matter where they are, those thresholds will remain the same, and I'll talk through what those thresholds are. To get our state thresholds, again, to set that level of risk for the entire population here in North Carolina, we've partnered with national researchers, done extensive research as well, and we've got feedback from our North Carolina implementers on what they would like to see in their feedback within creating these. So let's talk about the indicators first that are in this. I'm going to break it up between pre-K through 8th grade and then 9th through 12th, because we have different conversations in that span. So in pre-K through 8th grade, we're looking at attendance, disciplinary incidents, specifically just around what happened, the offense and the consequence, which gets into suspension issues. And then literacy, looking at grades, EOG scores. And I'm going to address what other is. You always have to have an other somewhere in a presentation, I think. And then we have math, and we have grades, EOG scores, and other. So let me just take a look at what the other happens to be. When the RFP was written for the MTSS module, we requested that the selected vendor, in this case it is Public Consulting Group, PCG is the vendor who won the bid, to go ahead and make sure that they partner with third-party vendors that our implementers have told us to partner with to help with building a very robust early warning system. And within there, we've asked for 8 others to be added, which means not only are we pulling data from PowerSchool into the early warning system, things like attendance and disciplinary actions, but M-Class data will come directly in. iReady data will come in because the field identified that. Things like STAR and AIMSweb, we asked the field, what do you want added to this? Again, if they are partnering with that vendor already, then the connector, and there's a really good terminology for those, like a flat file or an API, I've learned these things, are built at no cost to the district if they're already partnering with that vendor. And so what that does, it adds a more robust early warning indicator pre-K through 8 as to what these could be in literacy and math. And also what we're adding in, if we have implementers using our free of cost math universal screener, we're adding that in as well, so they can put those in there and get thresholds. There is no double entry in this system. Scores that are entered, I'll say like an M-Class, I'm going to use the word automatically, that I don't think I'm supposed to use that word. I've been told there's lots of words in this project you can't use, like sync or automatic, but it just magically appears in the early warning system to help build that indicator to know level of risk. Same if a teacher's progress monitoring within M-Class, it'll automatically populate in the intervention planning without double entry. And so those are the things within this project that no other state has been able to do, how this RFP has been built. Again, we selected these 8 other vendors based on what the field said they were already using, so that way we could build that in there. So that's pre-K through 8th grade. 9th through 12, we still look at attendance and discipline, but we also look at some other indicators that aren't so specific to literacy and math. In high school, we need to look at grade point average, course failures, end of course tests. 8th grade EOG scores actually are strong predictors of later on success. Grades, we've learned in our research that grades is a very strong predictor in middle school of high school success. So adding these components in at 9 through 12 allows for us to identify students who are at risk as early as possible, and they will have the historical data from where students were for however long they've been with us in North Carolina. So those are the different indicators. When we put it together into a system, the system organizes all this data. Right now we have educators having to go to this particular place to look at something, this particular place, and this puts all those indicators in one system. I'm going to show you screenshots of it, so that way they can problem solve in the right area with those state thresholds. Now, attachment 1 on eBoard does have the state thresholds in all of these areas for you. So that's a question we get, what are the thresholds going to be? And you'll see that there. For the ones that are identified as other, when it says other universal screeners, we partner with the vendor. We don't change, we're taking exactly what their research says and adding that to the system. But an early warning system organizes all of this at the most aggregate level down to the most individual level for a student, so we can do some large scale problem solving. So let's take a look at what the system will look like. And so I've, with the permission of PCG, giving some screenshots, we give demos joint demos across the state on what the system will be. But this is what a district or a principal would see depending on how high up they are within the chain of the organization. But really, where are students needing the most support? So if you take a look here at this particular widget, I think we're going to call them. I'm not really sure. If you have any rake names for widgets or roll-ups, we're taking all advice. But we have supplemental and intensive. Where do we have them need the most support? Are students receiving in literacy, math, or behavior? We can break this down pre-K through 12, but get that big aggregate. Within the world of MTSS, we have said that we need to problem solve large scale because there's so many students. We want to have big and large scale interventions to solve larger problems. And this system mirrors the professional development that our state has been implementing over the past few years. Let's take a look at what it would look like from a grade view. This is a 5th grade view. So this is all of 5th grade for this mock-up. There's a different word, I know, data. It's not mock-up data. I know there's another word. But within there we have, at the very top, if you notice, PCG has built in for us roll-ups saying how is all of 5th grade doing in the area of attendance, behavior, literacy, and math. Because we don't want to go right to a classroom level. It could be a whole grade level issue. And in this case, we see that at the very top roll-up that there are issues holistically in attendance, literacy, and math. And maybe behavior's fine because the students aren't in school. I'm not really sure in this particular example, but we can problem solve large scale. And then as we look down the list, what we see are these are individual classes, how they're doing. So maybe we have a certain class that's more at risk. Maybe it's not the whole 5th grade, but a certain class. And just the order that this information is presented is how we've asked people to problem solve across the state in our guidance with implementation of MTSS, is that we want to problem solve attendance. Are they at school? Behavioral concerns, are they in the classroom? And then let's take a look at academics before we make some really robust changes. Here's what a classroom teacher would see. Or I also have a created group. For example, you can create groups for interventionists, for counselors, someone who may not have a class roster within PowerSchool attached to students. You can also create groups within this system. And so what you see here is how the whole group is doing at the top. If you imagine this to be a class roster, we see as holistically attendance, students are coming to school, behavior and literacy are quite off, and then math has a strong indicator of students on target. Then the teacher can look down and see what's going on with their students. So if you see something like, if we take a look at, I don't know, the last person test, I think it says Beatrice. We have an S with a question mark under behavior. That is the communication between the intervention planning part of this platform and the early warning system, meaning that the student is receiving a supplemental or assistance plan within this model, and we're not sure exactly how they're doing. There's not enough data. But if you go up to test Angela, about 2 up, we have a student having an intensive intervention plan in the area of behavior. When you take a look what's happening with the progress monitoring, but that red exclamation point means that it's past the date to review the student's plan. And so these pieces connect to be able to allow a classroom teacher to not have to go to different places to figure out what's happening with students. Also, if we think about our administrators, they get a call from a parent, we're able to log into the system and be able to answer questions there. And then finally, within a screenshot of the system is to show that there are expansion columns. And this is an example of one here. So that way we know what's making up that indicator. So in this particular example, there's something about TRC and the composite score making up that indicator. So there's no guesswork of trying to remember, wait, what's in the system to make up this indicator? It's right there for each of those particular areas. So this is what the statewide early warning system would look like pre-K through 12. The only difference in 9 through 12 is where it says literacy and math will be an indicator called academics, going over those indicators I had talked about. We know that data is extremely important to make sure that it's protected. And so within this project on a daily basis, overall, we're working with our internal data management group. And so the business owners of these sets of data are giving us the guidance on who has access to it as this rolls out. We're obviously working with DIT for their prescribed protocols. And then PCG has their own prescribed protocols that they go through to make sure that security is at its highest level within this project. So to implement this in every single school, pre-K through 12, first of all, let's talk about why we'd want to. One, it's an awesome system. No one else has done it. And to have our students be this protected across the state, no matter where they go, is something of an opportunity we have here in North Carolina. But also, if we take a look at 105.41 Section A, our local schools and LEAs are asked to identify students at risk as early as possible without having to wait for end of grade, end of course, or other type of data at the end of a prescribed time. This now would allow districts to be able to do that in other areas than just academics, because we know attendance and behavior are playing in this part to get those academic outcomes. So this would allow folks to be able to meet this particular ask. So our implementation plan for this is to roll things out like we do in our division by our MTSS cohorts, because that follows the pattern of their learning they've had. So it would be for our cohorts 1 and 2 to have access and training and coaching and all the supports for implementation for fall of this coming year. And then cohorts 3 and 4 for winter. And then cohort 5, which is comprised mostly of our charter school community, for spring of 2019. That allows for us, one, we can't turn it on for everybody at the same time because we have these 8 different vendors we're partnering with too. And so PCG and those vendors, they have to have data agreements, and there's stuff that has to happen there to get those built. And then also we want to ensure enough professional development and coaching for successful installation. So to quickly talk through those, we have been communicating. I have the hyperlink to newsletters that we've had about the whole ECAT system in general. The early warning system, PCG has built for us a video clip that walks people through the early warning system, what it can do. And then we've been talking with our MTSS coordinators and our chief academic officers. And the only feedback we keep getting is thank you. Like, thank you very much, and can we have it right now? And that is the feedback that we continue to receive. Our division, with the help of PCG and other people in the agency here at DPI, would be to provide professional development. We do constant demonstrations to school districts. The professional development for the early warning system, we're taking content from what they're learning in the MTSS professional development modules and pairing that with the technology. So we're showing that direct link. This just complements what they've been asked to do. We work with district teams, and we're going to mirror our professional development model. Our secondary community practice helps guides us with our conversations for secondary, and then connect anything we can with always previous content, other things that are happening across the agency. We know this is a big project and we have to have technical assistance and coaching available. So we're creating screencasts, how to walk through the system, videos, guidance documents. Our MTSS coordinator means we focused on installation of this next year, pairing pieces with it for the entire system. And then my team does a lot of virtual data meetings with district teams to be able to provide technical assistance and coaching that way. Our research and evaluation team is going to be monitoring those state thresholds. This is our first best attempt at setting state thresholds based on all the research that's out there. We will get feedback from the field if we need to make adjustments as we roll out. This is how we're able to work and having a strong feedback loop. And then we're able to match implementation data with outcome data here within this project. So the big ask is to edit the current ECATS UERS to include this part, the early warning system, as part of the UERS. We definitely want to identify students who are at risk of adverse outcomes as early as possible to intervene and change those trajectories, and then give schools and districts the opportunity to problem solve with collective data sets. And when I get asked, well, what does the district have to do? They have to do what they're doing now, which is take attendance in PowerSchool. We have accountability load data already into PowerSchool, so that's there. So what they're doing, their actual work on having the system work is what their current functions are now. It's now going to allow for taking all of that collectively to allow for robust problem solving. Questions?
Questions from my colleagues?
Just
Willoughby.
This is great. I mean, you know, the earlier the better, identifying these at-risk children. I think, you know, the comprehensive approach is certainly what we've been asking for. Mine is a logistical question, or a logistics question, I guess. We talked a long time about having a single data source, which is PowerSchool. So is this data part of our current system? Are we moving data? I was looking at how many times we looked at, on the PowerPoint, talked about interfacing with PowerSchool. So are we going to be moving data, or is it actually going into our single source data system at the get-go?
So PowerSchool is the authoritative source for the data. And so what we're doing within this system is able to take, in PowerSchool, the data is in different views, different places, and there's no thresholds. So a student may be absent, let's say 8 days, but a classroom teacher is not seeing where at risk that is. And so it's organizing it in a way to make sense of what's in different places. Kind of like just putting all your blood work, instead of getting it on various pieces of paper in various places, putting it in one comprehensive component.
So the answer is yes, it'll all be single source PowerSchool. We won't have to move data from one.
I'm going to call Bill Hussey up here real quick so I can hear him in the back. Or Justine, any of them. But the PowerSchool will still be we're only entering data in PowerSchool. And again, the early warning system is that piece. For the special ed piece, they'll be entering data in to create IEPs.
And I don't need to prolong this. I can talk to you offline about it. But it just, you know, I know we've talked a long time and invested a lot of resources.
And that's not going anywhere.
Single source. Yeah. So when I read interface or I hear about moving data, it makes me nervous.
Yeah, and I'm going to let you start here.
If nobody else needs this, I can do it offline.
No,
I think we need it.
Okay.
And Justine Connor is here with us from PCG, so if you get down into data questions that I can't come at, we have an expert here, so, she said, no. We're moving data to certain places to make sure that we have access to it in ways that are more functional and provide opportunities to problem solve. And so as Amy was describing it, we're concentrating that data in one spot. And so there is, to answer your exact question, there are two places in which it's going to exist, but we're actually moving it. The authoritative source is in PowerSchool each night. That uploads and comes over and fills out what we need to inside the system to provide that ready to access. And this is true in special ed as well. Across the integrated modules, all three will be fed by these sources each night And so there's that integrated aspect inside the system itself as well as what we're doing to interface. We also have a source of work right now that we've got with PowerSchool we're working with them to make sure that all these things are working and working efficiently and effectively. We had a meeting with them. We had a kickoff meeting last week, I think on Tuesday, and then a further meeting with them on Friday to ensure that we're meeting our points of progress and are on a timeline. So I'm not sure that I gave you what you wanted. You're still scratching your head.
Well, you know, my question was really slide 5, when I looked at that, and it talks about ECATS has a direct data interface with PowerSchool. That says to me they're not the same.
The data is the same, but we've moved it from one spot to the next.
So we are moving data. I can talk about this later with him.
I don't know if this is the right term, but to me it sounds like
sharing is the word I want.
Sounds like we've created a user interface for the teacher administrator to aggregate data from the single source called PowerSchool, so that it's available to the user.
That's correct.
The data is not changed.
It's not, and the authoritative source remains the authoritative source. So PowerSchool is the authoritative source for attendance, for the discipline issues, for the various pieces. We're moving it, as I said, to congregate it in a spot that provides a user interface that allows for more effective work. And that has been the key for ECATS from the beginning, was for us to be able to collect data at a state level, but make it accessible to the LEAs to be utilized for problem solving, whether we're talking about Medicaid issues, whether we're talking about IEPs, or we're talking about MTSS.
I just know for so many years we've talked about a single data source, so that's where my angst always comes when I see interface or whatever else it is. I just want to make sure
it's the same data source.
We can still have this, we can still say we have a single data source for all this.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor.
Okay, I am very excited about this. I know we talked about it before it ever started being created. I mean, we were just thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if? And y'all jumped right on it, and I appreciate it. I love the reports at a glance. I think that's just very exciting, and teachers are going to love it. Administrators are. I do want to clarify, because I don't understand enough about interface and syncing and the other word, magically appearing.
That was my word, yeah.
So will this involve any multiple entries that an educator would have to face? You know, like entering something over here and entering something over here, repeating. You know, because we've experienced that in some other systems in the past.
So they'll take attendance in PowerSchool, like they do now, and then that data will come into ECATS.
Okay.
If they're doing their universal screening with MClass, that data will move from MClass to ECATS with the teacher not having to do anything.
What about IEPs?
We've built business rules so that as you bring forward data, and it goes into a particular spot with referrals, and then that information is moved all the way through the system. So you don't have to go back in and do it again and again and again. The system itself is going to allow it to work that way.
And then for that aspect, crucial data points that need to feed back to PowerSchool.
Yeah.
Crucial data points that need to go back to PowerSchool from ECATS, especially for the special ed module, is being worked through as well.
Excellent, because you know, our special educators, no educator needs additional work, but especially special educators who are doing long IEPs. And then my final question is, I saw the cohorts, how you're doing, you know, what is your timeline when this is all going to be? Everybody in the whole state is using it.
So it would be spring of 2019.
Really? That is amazing.
So that way we can roll it out in those cohorts. But this also, if we go back to our conversations about the July 1, 2020 SLD policy change, in the back end to all of this, we've been building these components, the free math universal screening and progress monitoring, and now ECATS, for it to all feed together to continue to give more support. And we need it in place for spring of 2019. So we have another full year to help support districts before that policy, though that's not the driving force, but as part of the plan as well.
Great job. Thank you so much.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, this is good stuff here. It really is. I'm very impressed. My question, I'm looking at one of the slides, the grade level view. And I think it's well, grade level review, I'm not sure what grade. But I want to, under the area, and it's the class roll, 5th grade roll up.
Okay.
Across the top.
Mm-hmm.
The behavior piece in green, and that, I think that's 80%. 80%. What does that represent? What does that mean exactly?
So in the attachment 1, we have our threshold set. So that means in that case that overall for the 5th grade, holistically, we don't have an at-risk population having lots of office discipline referrals or out-of-school or in-school suspensions. So what triggers that particular indicator are office discipline referrals and or out-of-school suspensions or in-school suspensions.
So it's triggered, the green dot behavior, it's triggered by the school rules or the definitions around student code, discipline codes.
And so we have districts right now who are partner with third-party vendor or lots of places to try to capture discipline data. And here also this work has allowed us to have a statement of work to make some changes within PowerSchool to have it more user-friendly, to put discipline data in there instead of having to do it somewhere else. And that will feed that particular indicator.
So wouldn't it be ideal if each school system in North Carolina could agree on the components of behavior?
So our work, yes.
If the intent is for this to be portable.
So what we do have is that through positive behavior intervention and support, we ask for every school to come up with common definitions and things of that nature. And I think that this platform can help accelerate that conversation.
And this is a sidebar discussion that I'll have with you soon. That literacy to me is loaded with lots of possibilities.
Yes. So yeah, let's definitely talk about that. Yeah.
Mr. Griffin.
So I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Jablonski, Dr. Hussey, Dr. Wilson, Norman, for your work on this. I participated in the NC-SIP Spring Conference last week, and the feedback across the state is very positive about this. It's very exciting to have an early system in place so that we don't have to stress about trying to identify students, who may have specific learning disabilities. I think the timing of ECATS in the early warning system is great, especially as we transition to 2020. We no longer had the 15 points discrepancy to identify students. I think that's great as well. This is really going to help our problem-solving teams at the school level with MTSS, because going back to several comments from the board, right now our teachers have to go to PowerSchool to pull attendance. You might have a separate document to track PBIS and behavior. And then you have to take all that data and then put it into another spreadsheet. And this is going to do it for us. So I think this is really going to help us. There was a quote in here that stuck out to me where it says that this will help us determine the right intervention for the right student at the right time.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about ECATS and the early warning system.
Thank you.
Mr. McGill, I'm getting the hook from the chair, so you got to be quick.
Stomachs are growling.
You have another comment?
Yeah, I'll make it brief. This is, I guess, a broader conversation. First of all, I love it. I think it's exciting. I support it. I get the indicators. I think they're on target. People who know more about that than I do certainly have developed those, and I'm for that. Early ID is important. It allows for the early intervention. My question at a larger level is about labeling, stigmatized expectations that are sometimes associated with that. I had a parent a year ago say, my child is doing so great at the early college, but she's not at risk. Please understand, she's not at risk now, and I keep telling her she's not at risk. And it was, for her, for that parent, it was a label about expectations and about other things, and so I just want to make sure that I do see at least one nod there, that there's the importance of understanding that, and where does this go, and how big, and just the expectations. I really appreciate what our principal said, that that we've got to have that, but I just don't want to hang that letter around their neck that lives with them on, and then self-expectations. begin to enter.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Mr. Chair, we have one consent item on our agenda tomorrow, residential school calendar, and that concludes our committee work.
Well, thank you, Mr. Davis, and all of our presenters for the SLA committee. We now take our break for lunch, and we will resume promptly at 1 o'clock.
You know that.
I wanted to say when you're
Yeah, I'm gonna miss one.
most of these are really, yes. Then you take other professionals and their